know that you can make a change.
This was kind of the original question that Brian asked. He's like, what are they looking for? Because people have all these questions about how to look for venture capital, what are they looking for, and am I a match for venture capital? But what I came back with Brian and tried to kind of communicate in the poster and the promotional materials is that question is a great question, but there's really three questions by way of introduction. First of all, you need to know why venture capitalists are looking for companies to invest in, and why do they get out of bed in the morning? And secondly, that will make what they're looking for make more sense. Because if you don't kind of understand why they're looking and what they're doing in the business, their business model, what they're looking for kind of doesn't necessarily make sense. And then the last thing that a lot of people ask questions about or is really helpful is if your what kind of matches their what, you need to know how they go about looking, because it is a little bit of a black box in terms of kind of how these people look for investments. So again, the objective for today is understanding why your what does or doesn't match what venture capitalists are looking for, and how to get spotted if in fact it does. But I think there's actually first two very kind of painfully obvious questions. The first one is, and Brian kind of alluded to, is like, why should you listen to me about this topic? The second thing is, why should you care? One of the conclusions that I'll kind of preview is that venture capital is actually for a fairly small group of people. There's a particular type of business, a particular type of entrepreneur that's a good fit. But the question, I guess, that I think you should also say is why does any of this matter for you specifically in your specific context? I grew up in Angola, Indiana, which is a tiny little town. If you've ever driven towards the East Coast on the Indiana Toll Road, you probably got gas at the last stop on the toll road before you get to Ohio. That's where I grew up. Could not get out of small town Indiana fast enough. Came up to Wheaton College. Out of Wheaton College, I was interested in international economic development and got a job. I was very fortunate to get a job right out of school for a nonprofit organization that did micro lending internationally, Opportunity International. Spent about 7 years there. In the process, I went to night school and got my MBA in a bizarre combination of things. I have an MBA in entrepreneurship, marketing, and nonprofit management. And I do finance for a living. Coming out of there, I was very interested, long story short, I'll come back a little bit to why, but I wanted to do something a little more hands-on. Left Opportunity International, and I was running a nonprofit investment fund for South Shore Bank, but out in the Austin neighborhood. So I spent a couple, 2.5 years wandering around the west side of Chicago trying to find manufacturing businesses that we could grow to create employment in the Austin and other western neighborhoods. So that's kind of phase one. Problem was that fund was dependent on some foundations, and that money kind of dried up, and I needed a job. And I discovered that the only thing I knew how to do was loan money to people that it didn't look like they could pay you back, which is what takes you to venture capital. So this string of stuff from Link, some of you remember, this is a 20-year span from Link to Ares. I started doing venture capital, venture lending in summer of 1997, so I just passed 2 years. The major pieces of that story are 5 years at GE Capital, which is gargantuan, 5 years at Blue Crest Capital, which is basically our own fund. It was me and a dozen coworkers for 5 years, and then we came back to a mid-sized organization. So I've worked at companies that were smaller than the people in this room, and I worked at one of the biggest companies in the world. But fortunately, I was really blessed, and it's an overworked phrase, but I really was blessed. I started working with some people here in the kind of 98, 2000 range, and some of them still sit in offices next to me. It's been the same group of people all the way to here. This is coming to an end, though. Starting in January, Ares decided to exit our business, which is a long story. And my partner and I decided to part ways. So I'm actually launching a new company in January called Mandorla, which I get to explain what a mandorla is. So this is your Latin lesson for the day. If you think about a Venn diagram with two circles, The part that overlaps is shaped like an almond. And mandorla is the Latin/Italian word for almond. And what I'm hoping to do in that overlap, the mathematical term is union, if you remember your geometry. I want to be able to take some of the things I learned back here about economic development and what I've spent the last couple decades. And that's really what I would like to blend kind of in my career going forward. And that's how Brian and I started talking a few years ago about how I might be able to work with him on that. So the relevant part of kind of what have I done with that last couple decades, more specifically is, again, hopefully to help you understand kind of the context of what I want to share today. All of those organizations were essentially a hybrid. You typically think of venture capital as being an equity investor and owning companies, and you think of banks as making loans. We have this really niche little business called venture lending, which is essentially a loan, but it kind of works like equity. And I won't go into kind of all of the details, but what that allows us to do as a team is to partner with some of the, just a massive number. We don't go it alone. We never kind of just do something on our own. We always do it in partnership with other venture capital firms. So I've had the real privilege of working with some of the real preeminent major venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, here in Chicago, New York, and Boston. We have kind of a national practice. We've even done some business in Ireland, which is an interesting little tech base. So I've had the privilege of sitting alongside them and doing some amazing deals. Now, this is the part that we tell. You know, some of we always kind of throw up the logos of people that you might be familiar with. But I would tell you there's probably just, for every one of these like great stories, I've got, has anybody heard of Nodality Biotech Solutions? No, you haven't. Their financial records are in a U-Locket storage place in California because I lost all of our money on that company. So we like to point out how we've kind of learned from success, but I could put up a whole bunch of logos of things like Ecomotors or Nodality. Done some really dumb, some of them were dumb, some of them we were just wrong. But it's kind of these relationships and this experience, which is what I would hopefully like to share today. As I said to Brian, there's two great examples of why I think almost anybody in business can learn from the venture capital kind of arena or the venture capital industry. It's the same exact reason, unabashed White Sox fan, by the way, just to be clear. My three boys, they don't play baseball anymore, but when they were young, I would make them watch Major League Baseball. Why would you make a 7-year-old watch Major League Baseball? It's because these guys have the benefit of a lot of experience. They're performing at the highest level. They've gotten coaching that is the result of a lot of experimenting and learning, right? When I'm explaining to my son how to pitch, and he's supposed to have this little duck wing motion, he's not going to believe me, but if I show him a picture and a thing of Mark Burley with the duck wing, he gets it, right? He understands. So, great arm slot, by the way. The other thing, same exact example, I am not a foodie by any wild stretch of the imagination. Boiling water is kind of my high-end cooking. But Gordon Ramsay, why do people watch the Food Channel? To be inspired, to learn techniques. There's things that they can do. I mean, this kitchen, I think, probably cost more than my house. No lie. But I'm never going to be able to use those kind of things. I'm never going to perform on TV. I'm never going to own a restaurant. But you can learn by watching people perform at the highest levels. And they've made a lot of really expensive mistakes. And that's what you want to learn from so that you don't make the expensive mistakes. So that's all kind of background, right? So again, this is kind of where we're going today. As I said, the first real question is, why do VCs invest in companies? Well, it's the same exact answer that anybody has for a job. It's a job for them, right? Somebody hired them to invest in startups, okay? So the question is, who hired them? Well, I want to walk through a specific example that will hopefully help you kind of understand the world that the VCs live in from a job or from a business model standpoint. So I tried to pick an example of somebody who would be local that people could maybe relate to. Is anybody a teacher or know a Chicago public school teacher? Pretty much, good, thank goodness. I was hoping everybody would know some, most people know a teacher. So the teachers have a pension fund. They contribute all this money into the pension fund. The state in theory contributes to the pension funds, although it's not exactly clear how that works anymore. But there's this big pot of cash. They have to invest it, keep it safe, and then when the teachers need it in 5, 10, 20 years, they have to be able to pay out their pensions, right? So it's an endowment or just an investment fund for the benefit of the teachers. What do they do with the money? Well, if you go on their website, you can actually answer that question. They invest the money mostly in equities, right? That's these bigger pieces of the pie. You got a little bit of cash. They invest in some real estate. Fixed income is bonds. Infrastructure is kind of a nice way of saying roads, oil and gas, that kind of stuff. And then there's this little sliver. It's actually not even 3%. It's about, I think it's like 2.5%, 2.7%, called private equity. And they take a portion of that cash and invest it in private equity. So they have $284 million that they are giving to venture capitalists and private equity. You'll sometimes hear a term, there's folks that do buyouts where they buy businesses, fix them up or grow them and sell them, and venture capitalists who start them. All that gets lumped together into this. So venture capital is actually a very tiny sliver, relatively speaking, of the investment world. That 284 million. The teachers, by the way, only have 10.5 billion in their pension fund. It's woefully not enough, in case you're wondering. We won't get political about pensions in Illinois. But it sounds like a lot, but it's not nearly enough. So what do they do with that 284 million? They hire 11 different venture capital firms that manage 29 different funds. And each of these has a certain amount of money. Some of these are names that you may recognize from Chicago. Pension funds are what we would refer to as an institutional investor. It's not an individual, it's a like entity. They're referred to as limited partners or LPs because their involvement is essentially limited to just investing money. They are not active day-to-day making decisions. They kind of hand over the money to the venture capital fund. And the person that we think of as the venture capitalist is also labeled the general partner or a GP. That's because they're generally in charge. They make the investment decisions. They decide kind of how to allocate the money and deploy the money. These guys, and there's a few women, I apologize in advance, I will keep saying guys, and the unfortunate reality is it's something like 97% of venture capitalists are men. That's another thing Brian and I are trying to kind of work on. A lot of people are these days. But what a GP gets paid by the limited partners is they'll get a 2% management fee on an annual basis, and they get a 20% share of the profits over a certain threshold. We can kind of go into kind of those economics here in just a second. But that's part of the capital. So if this fund is $1 million, that 2% comes out of that $1 million, and they have to kind of earn their fee back, basically. These are a limited life, typically, not typically, but almost always. It'll be like an agreement for 7 to 10 years. That consists of like a early 3 to 4 year period where they're investing, and then the back half of that life cycle. Again, another 3 to 5 or even 7 years is the harvesting or the exiting phase. So when these people put the money in here, it's a 10 to 12 year commitment. It's not a very liquid investment. They then build a portfolio, and we'll talk a lot about kind of why stuff goes into a particular portfolio. Now, these economics are kind of interesting because they're very different, and they're not super intuitive. Normally, when you think about investing, your primary objective is to get your money back. A venture capitalist actually doesn't think that way, okay? And the reason for that is, let's just say we want to be an average venture capitalist. So there's a service called PitchBook that tracks venture capital funds. It's kind of one of several industry data sources. If you look kind of over time, the median venture capital fund is $85 million. The average is 163. There are some massive ones and there are some small ones. You can see it's kind of moved over time. So 85 million is kind of a standard number to think about. And then this is an explanation of how the money gets distributed and what the return is. And you tend to talk about it in terms of multiples of invested capital. So if I give you $1, or if you give me $1, and I give you $1.25 back, that's a 1.25x, or a 1.25 return on invested capital. This tracks how people have done. The interesting thing is, if you look at, as I was saying, these are long-term commitments. If you look at funds, say, that are 7 years old, actually, or let's pick 8 years old, the 2009, funds that started in 2009, they're at about a 1.28 return at this point. But what this graph is showing is, of that $1.28, only 38 cents is actual cash that's gone back to the limited partners. Okay, most of that value, 89 cents, is still locked up in companies that haven't been sold or exited yet. So again, it just kind of speaks, and that, even some of them that are fairly far back still have a lot of the money. So here's how the math works. If I raise $85 million, at some point I have to, if I want to be average, I have to return 1.25. So I've got to come up with $21.25 million of profits. So let's rewind back to our typical fund here. Half, statistically, of the deals in a venture capital portfolio will lose money. Okay, they'll either go to zero a lot of times, or certainly return less. So 7 years later, if you invested $1, you might get a quarter back. But roughly half lose money. Again, so each one of these represents about 6%, roughly. So then you've got, of our remaining 18 deals, you've got about 6 that will return 1 times the money. So again, I invest $1, I work really hard for 7 years, and all I do is I get my $1 back. And in the math here, I've now got about 32 million back. And I'm still trying, so I got 32 million, and I'm trying to get to 106, right? That means I got to at least have again, statistically, the way this works out in reality, one of my deals is going to do pretty well and double my money over the life of the fund. And that's going to get me about, if I've divided all of this equally across the portfolio, which is obviously not reality, I'll get $10.5 million out of it. So now I've got about 42-ish million, right, on my way. Well, again, you can do the math, and I picked the iPhone on purpose. You've got to at least get 12 times your money on that one deal to get the fund's return just up to being average. So the take-home point that I want you to really remember about this section is this math, right? They're not even necessarily in a home run hitting business. They're in a grand slam bottom of the ninth kind of business. They're doing very risky deals, and they expect half of them to go away or lose money. That's table stakes. That's what they expect every morning when they wake up. And they know, we kind of refer to these, this is the not so nice term for these kind of sideways deals, or zombies. They're kind of the living dead of the portfolio. It's like they're doing okay, but I can't get rid of them. They're kind of not alive, but they're not kind of dead. They're just like following you around being annoying. You really build one of these portfolios for the home run. And again, I can really geek out on the statistics about the difference between the very best venture capital firms that return the best. This number is like 40 to 50x on one deal, right? And the bad ones, what happens with the bad ones is, you get down maybe, normally you would think if I have 3 deals that double or triple my money, that's pretty good. That's terrible in the venture capital world. So that's kind of how the numbers work. Like I said, the number one thing I would want you to remember about kind of this overview of how venture capital works is a lot of the same analysis actually applies to anybody that you talk to about raising money for your business. Okay? You need to know how the person that you are talking to makes money on their investments. And that's going to be different for a venture capitalist. It's weird for a venture capitalist. There's not a lot of businesses like it. Banks tend to be worried about not lose. They're at the opposite end of the spectrum. They come to work every day terrified that they're going to lose money. Okay. And then there's everything in between. There's angel investors. There's CDFIs. There's family offices. There's other kinds of investment funds. There's everything in between. So your number one job when you're looking for capital for your business is to know how the person, not the firm, but the person that you're talking to makes money. And I draw that distinction because if you think about take a big bank like JP Morgan, right? The bank actually makes money differently than people that work for the loan office. The small business loan officer for JP Morgan makes their money differently than the bank does, right? And it's okay to ask some kind of polite questions kind of about how that works, but a lot of it is just talking to people that have worked in those particular types of organizations so that you understand how that person thinks. Because not to be too kind of crass or blunt about it, but most people that you're going to interact with are going to evaluate things. They're going to evaluate you and your business through this filter. Okay, so that's kind of the why section. Okay, so with that kind of as context, if that's why I get up to look for investments every day, right? What do they look for in an investment? And I want to work an analogy here or an example that it's very similar to the process in your mind, or at least in my family's mind, when we ask a very simple question of what do we want for dinner? Okay? It's kind of a similar decision-making process. The first thing I want to talk about is what I would call an investment theme, right? And that's kind of internally focused. That's more driven by kind of who you are, say, as a family, right? So using my family as an example, one of our themes to food in life is we like Asian food. We like Chinese food, we like Thai food. We even sneak in a little Vietnamese once in a while, right? So that's a theme to how we eat dinner. And it's driven kind of by us, right? So we would make a decision to go to Chinatown based on who we are. That's our theme as a family. But when we get there, we're confronted with the marketplace, the external reality of the investing environment, okay? So now we have a choice. We've based on who we are, we've decided to go to Chinatown and we want to pick our restaurant. Well, our favorite restaurant, the restaurant that we really, really know is super awesome and that we want to go to, might be closed or might be super busy. We don't want to have to wait for the wait. We have to deal with that market reality, right? And then we kind of narrow it down and say, okay, based on kind of what's going on, we've got we want to do takeout, we want to do Szechuan because we want something spicy, looks really good. We get down to the point where we have to pick between two restaurants, right? Well, the way you pick between two restaurants is you kind of get a sense of the chef, but maybe you look at the menu outside, right? And you have very specific criteria of my middle son has a nut allergy, which we have to navigate around. My other son likes chicken, and my wife is more of the she's not a vegetarian, but she actually likes vegetables more than teenage boys. So we look at we go to those menus posted outside, and we sit down and we make our actual final decision, reconciling who we are as a family and our kind of criteria with the opportunities, with the restaurants and the menus that are available in the market, okay? A venture capitalist has exactly that kind of same constraints and opportunities. And so that's how I guess I would want to organize kind of this notion that there's a firm, Acme Venture Capital has a theme. They picked growth stage technology, right? And then they have a market thesis, which is large companies are moving to what's called SaaS software, subscription, right? It's a particular type of software, a particular type of, They have a thesis that these customers are going to need this for these reasons. External, so internal, external. And then they look at, kind of specific companies, ABC Software, with deal criteria, right? So that's making a very specific decision of how do we hit our theme and our thesis in this specific, it's like the specific menu item. Do I like this or not? Is it too spicy or not? Does it have nuts that I want to avoid? And there's things like revenue and the characteristics of the company and kind of gave some specific examples for software. But that's the decision-making for process for what they're looking for. So I thought I would pull off the internet some examples of a real venture capital firm. There's a firm called NextView Ventures, based out in principally Boston, but they also have an office in New York. You go to their website, and you go on the approach menu, right? And they lay this out. We're a seed stage investor, meaning pre-seed or stage startups, usually before meaningful traction, which actually is a great question earlier. These guys love stuff where the product doesn't even necessarily exist yet, right? That's pre-seed. The whole thing is an idea on a PowerPoint presentation. That's where these guys get involved. That's what they're good at. They write checks of $100,000 to $1.5 million, right? That's kind of their parameters based on who they are. They like to be hands-on, and then the geography is important because when you're working with things that are just ideas, you want to be close. They say they invest across the United States, but when they say we've got offices in New York and Boston, I didn't look at their portfolio, but I'd be willing to bet that 80+% of their portfolio is in the New York-Boston corridor. And a lot of it is probably within walking distance to their office. That's why Silicon Valley is what it is. These things are very high touch. It's kind of like raising kids. You don't raise kids and house them in an airplane right away. You want them close, right? And so there's geography is a constraint based on these people. It's an internal set of criteria. The market thesis that they lay out is this. They've looked at the world and said, over the next 20 years, the internet was great, that's all technology, but now the internet has to actually solve real problems. We, NextView Ventures, believe that the everyday economy, in other words, the internet doing things like food, in your home, Alexa, apparel. Anybody heard of a company called Indochino? Okay, Indochino, they advertise on 1 million podcasts I've listened to. Apparel, transportation, entertainment, health, work, and money. They want to find companies at that stage, at that size, in their market, that need a lot of hands-on help, where technology is changing these things. That's their market thesis. They've looked externally and determined this is where the opportunity lies. Now, deal criteria, I could not find, and I have yet to ever find, a venture capital firm that will put specific criteria on their webpage. They just don't do it, because it's too flexible, right? They need to reserve. It's not a checkbox kind of business. It's more art, really, honestly, than science. So I don't have a great example from anybody, but what I do want to try to do, and these colors are sort of helpful, hopefully. The criteria that an investor approaches one of these situations. So again, when I come up to the menu, I've got criteria. Here's kind of how they cluster them, right? They're analyzing, on the one hand, the business itself, and then the other hand, they're looking at the management team. Team, and not an individual, unless it's very, very early, right? So, simple 2x2 matrix. Obviously, this is supposed to be dark green. A good management team with a good idea, that's pretty easy. And a bad idea with a bad management team is also, hopefully an obvious decision. The tricky decision is when you have a bad management team and a great idea, or a good management team with kind of an average to kind of maybe bad idea, or an undefined kind of idea. There's a very, very, very old saying in venture capital that you bet on the jockey, not the horse. Okay? That's what this is. If you bet on the jockey, you're basically saying, look, if the idea is not as good as we think it is, a really good management team can take a bad idea and turn it into something. However, if I bet on the horse and I love the business, the jockey can absolutely flush it down the toilet. I can't begin to tell you, most of my bad losses have come from management teams that have taken what looked like a really good idea and executed poorly. So a venture capitalist does a lot of work getting to know the management team, the whole team, and analyze. We tend to obsess about this, but this is kind of one of the principal things. all of it taken in context. Now, then you have to look outside of that kind of closed ecosystem, right? A really good management team with a really good idea in a crappy economic cycle with a ton of competition or a tiny market, I could have the best manager and the best idea, and if it's only a $1 million business, I can't put enough money to work, and I can't make enough money for my investors, right? So you have to take this matrix in kind of an external constraints environment. Regulatory is a great example. Most people passed on Uber because you're fighting City Hall. You're going to take tax revenue. I mean, think about Medallion. I still can't quite believe Uber works. I still literally cannot get my head around Uber. You're going to the city of Chicago and saying those really lucrative, important taxi medallions are going to go away. That's my business. Who thinks that's going to work, right? That was a massive risk. I still can't quite believe I still can't believe it worked. That's why it's so valuable. They overcame this massive problem. Unbelievably good management team, very interesting model. 99% of the VCs that looked at it said no way because of that issue. So all of that again is also point in time based. It's actually a 4-dimensional problem, which is why thinking like a venture capitalist, you have to solve a 3-dimensional problem. It's actually 4-dimensional. The right entrepreneurs, meaning the right team, with the right model, in the right market, at the right time. This is what happened with the dot-com bust, if you think about it. A lot of those models that just completely went to nothing in the early 2000s have all come back. Have all come back. They were the right idea, the right team, the right market, wrong time. And again, there's another old saying in venture capital. Do you know what being too early or too late is called? Wrong. It's just wrong. It doesn't matter. You know, if you're too early or too late and you lose all your money, you still lose all your money. So you're really trying to solve, this is what the criteria look like. They're trying to evaluate the team, the business model, the external kind of context, or I've used the word market, but it's really context, right? And you're trying to do it at the right time, okay? Trying to solve a Rubik's Cube within specific time. There's a window of opportunity to get it right, and you have to solve that Rubik's Cube. So you might think, I'll give you a great example of what Silicon Valley is running around trying to do right now. You think about Bitcoin. People familiar with Bitcoin and some of the blockchain technologies? It is white hot. Again, because come back to the regulatory. Can you imagine this pitch, right? So you come in and you say, what's your business model? I'm going to put the US Treasury out of business, right? The timing on that is pretty critical. It's a great idea, and you can make a lot of money on it, but it's a question of timing, and there's a lot of people that think the timing is right for that, so they are running around like these kids solving Rubik's Cubes, desperately trying to solve it quickly and getting there first and being the one that kind of cracks the code on that. Because 10 years from now, it's going to be way too late. It's going to be way too late for Bitcoin. So that's, what else did I have here? Oh, so some of the specifics, I'll run through these fairly quickly. Timing we talked about. Every investment fund will look at different things. So a biotech fund, let me give you some extreme examples. A biotech fund is not going to look for the same things that an e-commerce fund is versus, say, somebody that does specialty materials. It's trying to kind of come up with the next stuff that we make chips out, computer chips out of. They'll have very different criteria based on what they're trying to do. So again, that's why it's very important to understand theme and thesis, because the criteria fall completely out. But these are kind of common generic things that apply across all the categories. Expertise, leadership, communication, perseverance. Again, intangible stuff that the team has demonstrated, right? The model is supported by data, okay? When they ask questions about your business model, this is when people want numbers, market research, cost comparison, like my product is way cheaper or way better. Okay, well, can you prove it's way better with actual number? What does better mean, right? That kind of stuff. The other thing that's important is will you make more money as the company grows? Or is this one of those businesses where you're losing 10 cents on every sale and trying to make up for it with growth, right? The numbers have to make sense. And then in terms of context, again, it's a question of nobody expects you to say, I'm going to control my context, okay? It's the external world. But you at least have to demonstrate that you understand your external world. If you're going to be Uber, you at least need to know how taxi medallions work. And another great example is economic tailwinds, okay? Can't tell you the number of, well, actually, I'll give you two. Does anybody know Redfin or what's the other real estate? Zillow, thank you. Zillow is the one I was trying to think of. We actually looked at that. They're great companies now, right? But you should have seen what they looked like in 2009, right? And if you're a real estate, if you're going to disrupt real estate agents, you better know what the trends are in home sales, and you better know how much, if it's a bull market and you're coming in at the top of the market, you better understand that and explain what you're going to do in the downturn. So again, the criteria can kind of be clustered around these things, but they will vary. Here's the number one thing I would want you to remember about kind of theme, thesis, and the criteria, right? And I hit on it here at the end. You need to be able to use facts to differentiate your team, your business, and the market opportunity. Because when I think back to the example of me going to Chinatown with my middle son, Jaden, right? I have to have the facts that there's no peanuts in that Thai food. Okay, he loves Thai food, but there's a lot of peanuts in Thai food, and it would kill him, which is obviously pretty critical to me. It doesn't matter how great that or how great that restaurant's marketing is, or how snazzy the entrance is, or how nice the hostess is. I need the data about the peanuts. Okay, same exact thing when you're dealing with any investor, any provider of capital. You go to a bank, you go to your Aunt Susie, you go to an angel investor. Maybe your Aunt Susie will invest in your business because you're a nice person, okay? But she's probably the only one. Everybody else is going to want data. What specifically about your background makes you good and makes you successful in this particular model? What about the business opportunity? Why is it so great? It's not because I just feel like it's great. It's, here's the numbers. Here's the foot traffic that goes by this location, by this train station, and the closest Starbucks is, there's no, if I'm going to open up a coffee shop, I want to know exactly how much foot traffic there is by the train station that I'm opening it up next to, and I want to show a map of where every other coffee is. That's what makes it a good, not, I feel like it's a good idea. You need the data about yourself, about the business specifically. This is where it's starting up now, and the planning workbook. This is really where Entrenuity helps with its training materials, is getting those facts organized and presented.
I know that you can make it better. I know that you can make a change.